Matt, it's our privilege to have you here in Roundup. Thank you so much for coming. We're
Good to be here.
a little town, and it's really nice to have your representation right here. We appreciate it. So we hear you're running for Senate.
Well, we haven't announced that yet.
Oh, you haven't? Okay.
We have not announced that yet.
Okay.
We certainly can say a couple of things. Number one, John Tester does not represent the people across Montana. And he will be replaced in 24. And what we want to make sure of is that we place the strongest candidate up to replace him. Mm-hmm. And, I've been taking this up with my family and considering it. It was very humbling to have the current state Senate president and the Speaker of the Montana House and 37 legislators craft a letter of encouragement and support for me, and plus many other people across the state. But we've got plenty of time. I tell folks, I've set a deadline. It's March the 11th, and it just happens to coincide with the deadline that the Secretary of State set for filing.
That is a coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. What would you like to say? Is there anything you'd like to say about the things that have happened this week, like what the straw was that broke the camel's back?
Well, really what set it all into motion for me was back in the springtime when Kevin McCarthy, after the Republican conference had worked together and crafted the the legislation to address the debt ceiling. All of us worked extremely hard to put that together, to take a residual money and claw it back from the unspent COVID funds and also from the new Green Deal, and to freeze spending levels at fiscal year 22 levels, and put a little bit of an increase of the debt ceiling in, like $1.5 trillion, or up until March 11th of 24. And after we did all of that work, and we were able to get 218 Republicans to pass that legislation, and then to have that sent over to the Senate and watch him go over to the White House and negotiate a separate deal with the president that took away all those savings and increased the debt ceiling, not 1.5 trillion, but just basically set a blank check until January of 2025, which was really, really disappointing to everybody. And that took more Democrats to pass that legislation out of the House than even the Republicans that supported it. So at that point, I knew we were going to have problems moving forward. We started pressing him for the appropriation bills to be brought to the House floor. We couldn't accomplish that. He backed us up for another continuing resolution. And basically at that point, we knew that the writing was on the wall. And even that, it took 209 of the 210 Democrats passed his continuing resolution to fund government. And while the president and the Senate were getting that all signed up, we had another leak that came out that said that he had negotiated a deal with the president to provide funding for Ukraine. And that's when we went ahead and said we're gonna pull this motion to vacate.
That was the straw.
Yeah.
So to the Republicans that are a bit divided on this decision, some of the criticism is that now nothing will get done. Do you have any words to say to that?
Mm-hmm. That's just a false premise. So we've got 8 of the appropriation bills that are left to be developed, passed on the floor, and sent over to the Senate. That's 8 of the 12. The total amount of spending for those 8 bills is $400 billion, which sounds like a big number. However, total spending for the federal government is nearly $7 trillion. So those 8 bills, they don't have anything to do with mandatory spending, which is the largest portion of the spending, and even of the discretionary that we end up negotiating with over those 12 appropriation bills. This is a small portion of that, but it's spread across 8 bills. We should be able to get that accomplished in 2 weeks' time. Patrick McHenry, who is a representative from North Carolina, has been appointed as the Speaker pro tem. So he can conduct all the affairs of the floor until we have a new speaker seated, which I'm anticipating is going to happen on Wednesday or Thursday. Okay. So the affairs of state will still be taken care of. Committees can meet. Committees can conduct all of their work.
Okay. show will go on.
Mm-hmm.
So the mainstream media kind of makes it seem like the Republicans in Congress are somewhat divided over this issue. Is that really true, or is there any behind the scenes baseball?
There is some division amongst the Republicans. There's a division amongst people that go to Washington D.C. about how much we should be spending. The fact is that I've made it very clear. I don't think people that have been in Washington for 2 decades should be lecturing me about how we should be funding government when they've been the architects to watch us and served over putting us $33 trillion in debt. Okay, so clearly their way, which includes continuing resolutions and omnibus bills, isn't working. We need to do something different. And the 12 appropriation bills is the only way that you're ever going to fund government in a transparent and responsible fashion. Oh, and by the way, that's what's in statute. So the Budget Act of 1974 calls for us to pass these individual appropriation bills to show how we're funding government. And because we're not doing that, that's why you see the spending going out of control, because nobody really knows what anything's being spent on. It just gets all mushed together in a great big omnibus bill. There was a report that came out 2 days ago. It said in 2020 that the federal government spent $3.3 billion on furniture. And then they brought the list out of the furniture products they had bought. And they were lavish leather armchairs and recliners and some things as ridiculous as solar-powered picnic tables.
I think I speak for most Americans that we're all watching in horror as some of this stuff is happening.
And the only way that you are ever going to rein that in is if you go and utilize the system that was put in place, and that is to use the appropriation bills, 12 singular appropriation bills, and that way you can see line by line where spending is going. It also helps us resolve a lot of our problems, because people say, what are you going to do about the border? What are you going to do about the weaponization of government, whether that's the FBI or the IRS or whoever it is? The way that you do something about the weaponization of government, you take money from them. And the appropriation bills are the way that we can take money from an agency. And there's one other way we can do it. It's called the Holman Rule, that gives you the ability to take a specific position and simply defund it. So not the cabinet, because the cabinet the cabinet members are different. But anybody who's not a cabinet member, through the Holman Rule, you can go into that agency and just zero out their pay and eliminate that position.
For example, the FBI, which we've seen do some pretty corrupt things these last few years, is that something we can hope is actually going to happen?
That is exactly right. That is why it is so important for us to get back to utilizing this appropriations process. And what I say is we have to get muscle memory built up. Congress has been ignoring the appropriation bills for 2 decades, okay? This has been in place for 50 years, the Budget Act of 1974, and they've only fully utilized the appropriations process 4 times. Over the last 8 years, they've passed, or 10 years, they have passed 130 continuing resolutions. So for us to pass a continuing resolution now, think about that, the very definition of it, continue the spending that's in place now. We would be continuing Nancy Pelosi's spending levels, because she did the last budget, and Joe Biden's policies. That's what a continuing resolution would do. So that's why we have fought so hard against it.
I don't think that's ever spelled out the American people.
I have spent the last several weeks spelling it out to the American people. And I've gone on conservative television. I've gone on, America One Network. I've gone on Fox. I've gone on CNN. I've gone on Newsmax. I mean, I've even gone to the left side though, and done that stuff on CNN. So that those people. I've gone on C-SPAN. Anybody who would have me on. We did 21. We did 21 separate.
What do they say to you when you go to CNN? What do they? When you start this, what do they say?
CNN will ask me questions, and typically they will start going to, well, Republicans help build this debt up too. And I say, you know something? You're right. That $33 trillion has been built up by Republicans too. Absolutely. I'm not saying this is all Democrats' fault. Yeah, and it's about the process, and we need to utilize the process that's in place. So when the state legislatures across this country, not just Montana, when they meet, they use the appropriations committees to determine how much they're going to spend, and they have X amount of time to get that budget developed and fund their government for the next year. In our case, it's for 2 years. And not only do they accomplish that, but they do it with a balanced budget. And we just, they have not been doing that in Washington, D.C. Now, I can't get, okay, with $5 trillion worth of revenue coming in and $7 trillion worth of expenditures, I can't get to a balanced budget this year. I do not have anywhere near the amount of support to get there. But here's just to show you how fast government grows. In 2019, pre-COVID, the total revenue collected by the federal government was $3.9 trillion in 2019. Spending was $5.12 trillion. They passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The Democrats went berserk, said it was going to put a big hole in the deficit, okay, and add to the national debt. But we all knew it was wrong. When you reduce taxes on folks, the economy grows. So we're going to collect, instead of 3.9, we're going to collect about $5 trillion this year. And we were spending about 5.1 trillion in 2019. Does anybody at this table believe that we didn't have enough government in 2019?
No.
I mean, so if we simply went back to 2019 levels, we have nearly enough revenue to cover that. But I can't get people to go back to 2019. I had to fight to try and get them back to 22 levels. And so that's what we're talking about. That's really what we're talking about.
The service and debt close to $1 trillion this year.
It will this year.
How do we cover our debt?
That is exactly what I've been preaching to everybody. So out of that $5 trillion that we're going to collect in revenue, okay, about $1 trillion of that is going to go to servicing the debt. 20% of it's going to go to servicing, paying the interest on the debt. And I say, we're looking at then $4 trillion to service $7 trillion worth of bills. So we're going to be adding very nearly $3 trillion a year onto the national debt, which is sitting at $33 trillion. So when people start giving me a hard time about forcing these changes, I say, look, we're not talking about a 20-year or 50-year problem anymore. In 5 years, $3 trillion a year, okay, puts us at $50 trillion. And at $50 trillion, that will consume half of the collections in order to pay the interest on the debt. And right now, we have countries that are looking at changing the reserve currency from the dollar, whether it's China and Russia dealing with Saudi Arabia buying oil, or the BRICS in South America saying they want to change reserve currency. And when folks say, how long can we continue to pile this debt up? We will continue to pile debt up until people say, I went to the grocery store today and it cost me as much money to buy a bag of groceries as what I used to buy 5 or 6 bags of groceries for. Or the global economy says, we're not going to recognize the dollar's reserve currency anymore. And if that happens, it will plunge us into an absolute economic disaster like no one has ever seen. A deep.
We're going to go into recession probably within the next 6 months.
Congressman, thank you. I just have.
I didn't know you were in.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh,
We're chit-chatting. It's a chit-chat
Best
interview.
way to have an interview.
I had one other question, but now I'm trying to think what it was. But I want to thank you for your
The
time.
roast beef and the beets are great.
Have you been able to eat? I've asked you so many questions.
I have.
And I
I have.
appreciate you giving me your time.
Well, it's great to be here.
Oh, I know what I wanted to tell you. A lot of people feel that you best represent us in Congress. So we're hoping that that's what you continue to do.
Well, we just want to make sure that John Tester doesn't go back because he doesn't represent us.
Very good.
And that's critically important.
Well, Godspeed to you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming up. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the interview.
This is off the record.